Hi everybody, this is Bell Marduk on YouTube and Mirthless on Something Awful, and I've decided to do a Let's Play video. This is my first Let's Play video, and I'm going to be doing it of ToME, Tales of Maj'Eyal. It's a roguelike game that was released by darkgod, and he's been working on it for a very long time. It's won Roguelike of the Year for 2 years running, and it's a very fun game to play, but I find that there's just not a lot of information out there, and a lot of the videos that are out there are really aimed at people who already know the game. And right now, with where the game is at, and with darkgod trying to get it on Steam, we need more videos that are accessible to people who are unfamiliar with the game. So I hope that both veterans of ToME and people who are just interested in what the game is all about will tune into this video and series and see exactly what the game is like. So what we're going to do is we're going to start out a new game. Now I have a bunch of stuff unlocked here that wouldn't be available for a normal new player because you have to get achievements and such to unlock those items. But what we're going to start with is something that everybody can play with. So I'm going to make a Bulwark character. And there's a bunch of different options in ToME. You have the standard, Tolkien races, human, elf, halflings, dwarves, and then you also have these bonus races that you can unlock later on, which are yeeks and undead. For the purposes of this, we're going to go with something that's going to be really simple to play, so we're going to pick a dwarf, and then we're going to go for Bulwark. And a Bulwark is like a shield wall character, just sort of like a tank. And dwarves are a very hardy race. They get bonuses to saving throws and start with high strength and constitution, which is very important for a new character. You might also notice they have a very low experience penalty compared to, say, like a Shallower, which is a type of elf. They have much more health, and they level a little bit quicker. So okay, now we're at the character creation screen. And we have a bunch of different options. You have the core stats on the side, which is strength, dex, con, magic, willpower, and cunning. For this character, most of what we're going to pump is strength and constitution. And we're going to start with strength, because we want to get into the best possible armor as quickly as possible. We start with one generic point that we can spend freely and 2 class points, but we can unspend points in existing talents. So we're going to take this point out of the dwarf starting talent, which is Resilience of the Dwarf, which gives a on-demand bonus to armor for a very short period of time. It's not really useful at this level, so we're going to put into armor training instead, and that's going to let us start with plate armor if we find any on the first couple of floors before we've had time to gain some levels. For class abilities, the Bulwark is mainly built around using shields and defending. So there are unlocked trees at the start are Shield Offense, which has different offensive shield abilities, and Shield Defense, which is mostly passives, and sustained abilities that you don't really have to activate. And they synergize well together, like Shield Wall gives you high armor and reduces your chance of being stunned, and Shield Expertise increases the damage you do with shield attacks. And then you have things like Shield Pummel, which have a stun effect, which is really useful. We also have Combat Techniques, which has Rush, which is a mobility ability, as well as some accuracy increases in Combat Veteran, which is all passives that add to stamina regeneration, health regeneration, spell saving throws, and give stamina when you kill enemies. For starters, we're just going to put a point to Shield Pummel and a point to Shield Wall, because these are 2 of our best abilities, and we want to get them to high level as soon as possible. The opening for the dwarf starting area finds your character in a place called Reknor, which is a dwarven city north of your dwarf starting area. The city's been taken over by orcs, and your scouting party, who you were in charge of, has been completely wiped out. All that's remaining is you and a dwarf berserker named Norgan, and you have to survive against waves of orcs. Now, in the starting area, what we see here is our buddy Norgan. He's outlined in green, which means he's friendly, and as you can see on the side here, he's quite a bit more powerful than we are. He has about as many HP, he's a higher level character, he has more physical power. As you can see, our physical power is a little bit lower. And that's because he needs to stay alive, because the enemies in this area are a little bit harder than you'd find in other starting zones. You need to have him around, and you want to keep him around for the entire starting area if you can. He can die, but hopefully that won't happen here. So, also my buttons are missing, so I'm going to reset my interface positions. No, that doesn't seem to have done it either. Let's resize the window. There we go. Okay. Now, there's a rat over here on the side, so we'll kill that first. And it's just like a roguelike, normal roguelike game. You can do a bump attack to kill it. But unlike most roguelike games, oh yeah, Z is an auto-explore button, and we'll be doing that a lot. It's preferable to moving normally, because you'll stop when you see a hostile enemy nearby. And as you can see, it was kind of barking at me there, but it's because I saw this enemy off in the distance. Now, for active abilities, we have things down in our hotbar, and it's kind of like an MMO, and I'm pretty sure ToME has been inspired a little bit by multiplayer online games, in that you have multiple abilities that you can activate or keep running at all times. And in this particular case, we're going to use block. And block will shield block an attack for the block value on the shield that you have equipped, which in this case it'll block up to 20 points of damage, and as you saw, it did no damage to me. It'll also flag them with a debuff called Counter Strike, which when you hit them it does extra damage and has a chance to get a critical hit. Second ability that we can use right now is Shield Pummel, which is a stunning attack which does quite a bit of damage. As you can see, with Norgan's help, we killed that already. So we're just going to wade through these little fodder enemies until we get something challenging. And we're going to explore as we go. Now this enemy is going to be a little bit harder. He's an orc soldier rather than just the standard issue base orc. And he hits hard because he's dual wielding. And we want to kill him as quickly as possible. So we're just going to shield bash and we're going to kill him before he can regenerate any health. Now, as you might be able to notice, I'm sure you've noticed by now, if you're familiar with roguelike games, ToME does not really have a default ASCII tile set. There is an Ascii Mode that you can turn on, which isn't true ASCII, it uses tiles. But I really prefer to use the default graphics set. The tiles are made by Shockbolt, and they are absolutely beautiful and amazing. He works on new tiles for this game all the time. They just released a new version that had a whole bunch more tiles in it. And the default, or the graphical interface really makes things very clear. And I find in a lot of games that the graphics interface can actually make things muddy or make it hard to tell what's going on. But in ToME, I can't really play without it. And we're just going to keep exploring until we clear this entire floor. It's always a good idea to clear floors in ToME, both for the experience and because sometimes you'll get things like artifacts laying on the ground. In some areas you can't come back to, and even if you can, after a certain number of turns, items are wiped off the floor. This is to keep the game from getting really lagged up after you've been to dozens of different areas. So if you leave something behind, you might lose it for good. I understand that artifacts that are caught in sweep will eventually have a chance to respawn, but considering how narrow the level ranges are for a lot of artifacts, it's unlikely that you'll ever see them again. So, now we're getting low on health here, and this is an interesting feature of ToME that I very much enjoy. In most modern roguelike games, you still have potions, you have consumables, and darkgod doesn't like consumables, and he got rid of them completely, and he's replaced them with infusions and runes. And infusions are abilities like potions. In this case, we have a regeneration infusion, and it heals you for 60 life over 5 turns. So you get about 11 hit points a round for the next 5 rounds. And we have a wild infusion, which decreases the physical damage you take and removes a physical effect like a snare or a stun or a freeze. So we're going to use the regeneration infusion, and just to make sure we don't take any more damage, we're going to use the wild infusion. So we'll finish off this orc, and as you can see, our hit points have gone way back up, and we're doing okay now. And you can use these infinitely. There's you don't lose the ability to cast them after you've used them X amount of times or anything like that. The only thing they have is a cooldown. And the cooldowns can actually be quite short, and in later parts of the game, some builds are able to just roll that ability endlessly. And the game is balanced around that. Like, ToME has one of the most well-balanced end games that I've ever played through, in that it stays consistently hard at every point. You're never going to reach a point in ToME without a lot of experience playing, where your character is a godlike destroyer of worlds. So, we're almost off the floor, and because I've played through the game before, I have an item called a Transmogrification Chest. This is something you unlock, which will automatically pick up items and recycle them for you as you go through dungeon levels. You won't have this the first time you play, but you will want to pick up everything you find within reason. I don't have anything here I can really use except a pair of iron gauntlets. These other items aren't very good. I have a decent enough weapon right now. I don't want to use this dagger because its base damage is way too low. And the iron mace that we have here isn't appreciably better than my sword. So we're just going to go to the next floor. And because we have the Transmogrification Chest, it'll give us the ability to vendor everything every individual level. Now, like I said, your first character or two, you'll probably still have to carry things manually. And you may want to carry only items that are magically enchanted or something like that, because they do sell for a little bit more. Okay, so we have a rogue-type enemy here. They use dual-wield daggers, they're kind of hard to hit, and sometimes they'll poison. They also tend to have infusions of their own, which means they can heal, so we want to be really careful with these, because one of these could easily kill my character. I'm going to use shield block, and then we're just going to counter that damage, and as you can see, he went down pretty much instantly. Oh, we found some iron plate armor. Now this is why I put that point into armor training at the start, is so we could put this on. And iron plate armor is quite a bit bigger than the regular iron mail. As you can see, the armor value is almost twice as much, and the defense value is almost twice as much. The fatigue is higher, which is an increase to your cost for abilities, but we don't have any problems with fatigue as a bulwark, at least not until much later in the game, so it's okay. There's also traps scattered about the level. Now, in version 43, the version that just came out, darkgod removed many of the traps from dungeons because they proved to be more of an irritation than a threat. And Reknor, the dwarf starting area, has not had them removed yet. So they're kind of an interesting addition that you won't really see pretty much anywhere else. Now, we found a really nice pair of gloves here on the floor, and blighted iron gauntlets, which do extra damage on your melee attacks and increase your resistances a bit. And this is helpful because the boss at the end of the Reknor dungeon does blight damage, so that will help us a little bit there. We also found a green reinforced iron shield of fire resistance. Now, green is an ego. It means the item has a enchantment on it. A green item has 1 or 2 minor enchantments. Blue items have at least 1 greater enchantment, and purple items have 2 greater enchantments. And we also found a copper ring of frost, so we're going to put that on too. I don't expect to run into any cold damage, but we don't have any rings on right now, so... Now this is a Iron Torque of Mind Blast. It's a charm item, and you equip it in your tool slot, and when you use it, it'll let you cast a spell or use a spell-like ability. And in this case, we have a psionic ability called Mind Blast on it, which does a lot of damage for this level. I'm surprised that rolled that high, but as you see, 76 damage, that's 3 or 4 times what I'm doing with any other ability, and we'll just be able to one-shotting these orcs. Wow, these are quite a bit harder than I was expecting. Yeah, this one's level 4, and this one's level 3. This combo could have easily killed me if I was playing a different character class, but thankfully the Bulwark is very strong defensively and could survive a fight like that. It's very easy to die in ToME, especially in the starting areas, and you'd expect that from any roguelike, but because of ToME's emphasis on tactics, they expect you to play your character pretty much really well all the time, and it can be kind of a demanding game in terms of the challenge level and the tactical ability required sometimes, but I find that that's part of ToME's appeal. It's not like many other roguelikes, which are really about bump damage and knowing when to use your consumables. And in the case of ToME, a lot of fights will be almost insurmountable for some character types, and it's on the player to find out a way that they can get around challenges that would otherwise destroy them. In the case of this character, there's not a lot that's going to challenge them at this early level, but much later on in the game, they'll face mobility issues and problems with caster-type enemies that will be very hard to overcome. Now, this does a beam, which is interesting, because beam abilities will fire at every enemy in a line, so we're going to kill all 3 of these enemies probably with 1 cast. Okay, so we didn't kill that one. He's got a lot of health. We'll finish him off, and we'll just keep exploring. Reknor has 2 normal floors and a boss floor. Most of the starter dungeons will have 3 floors, with the exception of the undead zones, which have 4, and I believe the Sun Paladin zone, which has, I think, 4. I know it's 4 if you count the area that you move into after you finish the zone itself. Okay, so we're going to go down a level, and we're going to look at these items real quick. There's nothing really here that we want to use. I think I'll equip this hat because it's got blight resistance on it, and even though it's cloth and I'm not going to use it long term, it will be helpful against the boss. Okay, and we just leveled up again. I didn't spend the points the first time I leveled up, and I rarely do. I usually forget. So for this, we have 3 generic points available, and we have 2 class points available. And that's because I forgot to spend a generic point character creation. Wow, that was dumb of me. I'm going to put a point into weapon mastery, and I'm going to put a point into resilience of the dwarves, which we took a point out of earlier to level armor training, if you remember. And I'm going to put a point into vitality, and vitality is an interesting ability. It reduces the duration of effects like poison, disease, and wounds, and gives you life regen when you drop below 50% health. And it's not a lot of life regen, and it's not a lot of healing bonus either, as you can see after that. But it's enough, and it can be very helpful in the end game because poisons and diseases can be some of the most damaging abilities late in the game possible. So you want to get this pretty early as you have the points for it. We're also going to put 1 more point to shield Pummel and 1 more point to shield Wall. And we're going to put... Let's do 4 of these points into strength and 2 points into constitution. Every level, you'll get 3 stat points. Almost every level, you'll get 1 class point and 1 generic point. On every 5th level, I think, you get 2 class points, and every 10th level, you get a category point. When you get 2 class points, you don't get a generic point. So in the end, you will have less generics than class points. Okay, now, as you can see, this floor is a little bit different than the previous ones. It's a narrow corridor. This is because this is the boss chamber for the dwarf starting area, and the boss of the dwarf starting area is Brotok the Reaver, and he's not very easy to kill. This is Brotok down here, and as you can see, he's level 7. He has an orange name, which signifies he's unique, and he has much more health than any of the enemies we fought on the earlier floor. His physical power is through the roof. He's also an enemy type called a Corruptor or a Reaver. He uses diseases and poison and blight damage, and he's very, very hard to kill. So it's a good thing that we kept Norgan alive through the previous 2 floors, because he's really going to save us here. So I'm going to wait for Norgan to engage before I get into melee, and the first thing I'm going to do at the start of this fight is I'm going to cast my Mind Blast Torque, and I'm going to hit him for, wow, only 22 damage. He did not take a lot of damage from that at all. Okay, so now we're getting in close. I'm going to pop my Regeneration Infusion and my Wild Infusion. That way, if he hits me, he'll hit me for less damage, and I'll heal it back. As you can see, he's already put a disease on me, which is going to do 20 damage every turn. So that won't even heal through, or the Regeneration Infusion will not even heal through the disease I'm taking. Okay? Now we're going to Shield Bash him, and unfortunately it didn't stun him. I'll use Block, he's got Counter Up, and he's almost dead between the 2 of us. Another Mind Blast, and I think 1 or 2 more hits ought to do it. There we go. And he dropped 3 items, but unfortunately none of them are going to be useful to us. As you can see, the gray items, this is an indication that an item is unidentified. So we're going to use our Orb of Scrying down here. And every character starts with either an Orb of Scrying or some means to identify items. And when you identify the items, you'll get a little lore blurb, and I'll just skip those. I don't want to spoil you, because they're kind of interesting to read. And now we can look at each item. We have Bill's Tree Trunk, which is a 2-handed mace. It doesn't do anything special, just a lot of damage. Serpent's Glare, which is a Mind Star, which are used for willpower-based casters. And Coarse Fall, which is a Mage Staff, which boosts different elemental types. And is kind of intended for the evil spellcasters in the game. Willpower-based casters are kind of like druids, and arcane caster weapons are for clerics and mages. But we're not going to use any of these 3 items, so we're just going to let these get vendored. Actually, I'm going to save this as a quest later on that'll be useful for. But these other 2, they're just vendor trash for us for now. Okay, we're going to finish searching the room. I don't believe any other enemies can ever spawn up here. Just a whole bunch of loot after you kill the boss. And we found a Great Maul, which isn't going to be useful to us because we're using one-handed weapons. Lightning Bow, we can't use bows yet. A Robe, and it looks like a Mail Armor, which is a little bit better in terms of armor than what we've got equipped, so we're going to use that instead of the Heavy Plate for now. And I'll just drop that because these don't sell for a lot. And now, we're just going to get out of here. And once you finish the dwarf starting zone, Norgan leaves your party. Unfortunately, you can't carry him around with you forever. And you find yourself in Iron Council, which is the dwarf starting town. And only dwarves can be in Iron Council, so it's actually a special area that most players will never see unless they're playing a dwarf. There's various townsfolk around, there's shops, we're not going to go in any of them yet. There's little statues, and if you look at them, you can get little information on what the statue is. A warrior of the Empire, mystic of the Empire. There's a couple of dwarven emperor incarnates. And as you can see, there's a couple of civilians up here with blue borders. This means they're rare enemies. And when they're civilians, they're not hostile to you, but you can actually kill them to get some loot if you want. It was a lot more lucrative in previous patches, but now it's kind of pointless. So this is another downstairs to a new dungeon, and this is another dwarf-exclusive area. It's called Deep Bellow, and it's sort of a Lovecraftian horror-style cave with fungal walls and faceless dwarves running around and these big black enemies called drems, who are covered in spikes, and when you hit them you take damage. So we're going to have to be very, very careful in here because there's a lot of enemies that hit very hard and can kill us very easily, and this time around we're not going to have Norgan to save us if we get in trouble, so we'll take it slow and move in through one step at a time. And you can see out in the distance there's a couple of bat-looking enemies. These bat enemies are cursed kind of enemies, and they cast spells, and they have a gloom effect which can stun you. So we want to kill them at a distance. They'll also run away if we try and catch up with them. So we're going to hit that one with a Mind Blast, and then we're going to deal with this Drem while we wait for our Mind Blast to come off cooldown. And then we'll cast it again and get that other one, and he's not quite dead. So we'll try and close the distance on him and finish him off. Rogue type enemy, and hit him too. Alright, I'm sorry about that. It looks like my hard drive ran out of space in the middle of that, so hopefully I didn't lose too much there. Oh wow. As you can see, we have an enemy over here who is a rare. They are surrounded by a purple border. They're like the enemies we fought up on the surface. And it looks like he's a corruptor, which this actually might kill me. Thankfully in ToME you have multiple lives, or you can choose to. But I'm taking a lot of damage from this, and I don't see myself surviving. But hopefully I'll be able to take it with me. Oh wow, I think we just lived. That was really close. That was really, really close. Okay, so we're going to go back to auto-exploring this level now that we've killed most of those enemies. And it's the same thing as like with Reknorn, and this is how you're going to go through most levels. You're going to auto-explore until you run into an enemy, and then see how you want to handle that enemy tactically. And there's lots of little vermin enemies in here that aren't very threatening, molds and wolves and things like that. And they're interspersed with these horror-type enemies, like this Brecklorn, which are those bats, or this Granarvor, a large slug-like creature that moves slowly, leaving a trail of acid in its wake. Its head has strangely humanoid features. Oh, there's another one. Oh yeah, these split. I forgot. And some enemies do this. They're called breeder enemies. It's a holdover from Angband, where an enemy will split off into multiple forms. Unlike in Angband, it's actually reasonable to kill these things, but it can create some interesting challenges, especially later in the game. Some of the enemies you'll encounter, like brittle slimes, can actually kill you with their breeds, so you have to be kind of careful about it. Oh, that rare enemy we killed earlier dropped a bow. It's not very useful to us. But some of these rare items can actually have very useful drops. They're especially good for casters since they tend to have unique modifiers to elemental damage you can't find anywhere else. I'm just going to skip lore items that I find for now, because again, I don't want to spoil any of our viewers on the interesting details of some of these places. The story is mostly told through little notes like that, and what is written here has been put out there in part by fans and in part by darkgod, and it's pretty well written, and the world has a really interesting atmosphere. darkgod pulled a lot from conventional fiction as well as horror and science fiction in making his world, and he's managed to take Tolkien-like characters and create a world that's very much its own. The world of Maj'Eyal is not a pleasant place to live in. There's monsters everywhere. Mages are hilariously corrupt and manage to almost destroy the world. The mages that are still out there are being hunted mercilessly by zealots called the Zigguranth. And what factions do exist in the world are splintered. They don't really get along with each other. There's histories of racial intolerance and things, and all of it's basically on the ruins of a failed civilization called the Shertul. And they have their own interesting story that will come into play at later points in the game. And he manages to blend together these genres very seamlessly. Which, considering that, you know, he's not really a professional fantasy writer, at least to my knowledge, or anything like that, it's amazing how rich of a world he's managed to create. Okay. Heal up that damage real quick. These. Oh, those are really nice. Look at that. +3 strength. That's our best stat. So we're going to put those on. They have less armor than the... Actually, no, they don't. They have exactly the same armor. I never realized that. Blighted Iron Gauntlets? Yeah, sure enough. I guess it doesn't matter. And we found a Scorching Lantern. And it has the same light radius as the lantern we have on, but it does 10 fire damage if we get hit. Which, that adds up real fast. We have a big group of enemies up here. We have to be careful or we can easily get surrounded by these. And as you might imagine, as in any roguelike game, that would not be a good thing. Okay. So we have a couple of shadows here. And these shadows could have been spawned either by a rare enemy nearby, or they could have been spawned by another type of horror which will rarely appear down here. And these actually hit pretty hard. They do elemental damage. Our armor really isn't very helpful against them, so we're going to try and get someplace safer. If we can. We're currently bound to the floor. That's not good. And we're just going to keep using our abilities down here at the taskbar at the bottom to do our best to stay alive. Because if we just go in here trying to hit everything with our auto attack, bump damage, it's not really going to do well for us. For most characters, it will end in a pretty speedy death. There is some characters that specialize in that style of combat. If you prefer standard roguelike style combat, there's enemies like... or there's characters like the Temporal Warden, the Arcane Blade, which actually excel in bump damage. Brawlers do very well with bump damage. So you don't have to play them as actively as you would with, say, a Bulwark or a Berserker. My first winner was just last week, and I did it with a mostly bump damage character. So even the bump damage characters are viable to the end game. You just have to build around it. Okay, now let's see what's spawning these shadows. Yep, it's another type of horror, a Gran or Vin. Shadows seem to be drawn to its massive form, and your light dims as it approaches. We're going to try to kill this quickly, because we don't want to deal with too many of these shadows. Ooh, we're doing pretty bad on health here. As you can see, the screen got a little shade of red. That's what happens when you start getting low on health. You'll get a flash, kind of like in World of Warcraft or other MMOs, which can be extremely helpful if you're sort of half-assing, paying attention. When you suddenly discover that you're low on health. Yeah, as you can see, we just hit a breeder enemy and taking a lot more damage than I expected. These are quite a bit higher level than us. Okay, those are taken care of, and we'll just keep going through here. We're almost to the end of this dungeon. Because it's a starter area, it only has 3 floors, and both of the dwarf starting area dungeons have 2 regular floors and a boss floor. We're going to use this dexterity hat. Dexterity adds to your accuracy, your defense, and it also adds to certain abilities and talents. For a Bulwark, it adds to their shield block ability, and it adds to their likelihood to counterattack with a shield block. So that's really useful for us. We also have a magic belt here. It's got healing mod on it, which is nice. That makes our regen better. And it also has blight resistance, which is useful in the starting area, also for the next boss as well. I'm not gonna. I mean, it's not gonna be useful enough that I'm gonna put on my other blight resistance gear, but every little bit helps. Okay, now we're gonna go on to this next boss here, and this is the Mouth. He has 9,000 hit points, and his accuracy is maximum. It cannot go any higher. As you can see, there's 2 stars there. How are we going to deal with this? And as you can see, he's just pulling me towards him every round, so I had to be really careful. And he keeps spitting out these slimy crawlers, so we're going to kill the slimy crawler. And his health has gone down 10%, so it's tied to these little enemies he keeps spawning and sending after me. So we're just going to carefully kill all of these and try to avoid being pulled in. As you can see down here, he's pulling us in every round. Another thing that's interesting about ToME is projectiles have their own speed. They don't automatically hit. So if you spot the projectile, you can actually move and avoid it, which is something I really like. And some characters who move much faster than normal, or can use abilities that make them move much faster than normal, can dodge incoming fire from almost any type of caster in the game by using those abilities wisely. Unfortunately, that one just hit at a wrong time, and I didn't have the ability to move out away from that one. Now he's almost dead. He's got about 3 more enemies that he's going to spawn, and we're just going to try and avoid those blight bolts and kill these as just quickly as we can. And if you don't kill them fast enough, you can get multiple that'll be on the screen at the same time. This is one of the easier bosses, which is a blessing considering that Brotok is easily the hardest newbie zone boss. And as you can see, all we had to do was I wonder if I can kill him now that he's only got 32 HP. No, he takes no damage. And there we go. And he dropped 4 items, so let's see what we got here. Iron Great Sword of Erosion, Miner's Pair of Rough Leather Boots, and Rejuvenating Steel Mail Armor of Acid Resistance, and a Tooth. The Tooth is a Digger implement. It goes in the same slot as our Mind Blast Torque, which we're going to be replacing pretty soon anyway, so it doesn't matter if we get rid of it. And it also lets you dig through certain types of walls that are diggable. And as you can see, it's got some enhancements on it. It gives us armor penetration. It makes enemies take 15 points of blight damage when we get hit, and it adds to our blight damage. Now, we don't do any blight damage as a Bulwark, except what's maybe on our gloves or whatever. So we're going to equip it just for the armor penetration and the damage reflection. Alright, I'm getting multiple errors about my disk space, so I need to finish this recording up. Now that we've cleared this dungeon, we don't really have to go back up through the long way. We can actually use our Rod of Recall, which we got off the first boss, and I didn't mention it at the time because I wasn't going to use it. The Rod of Recall is a magical item that will take us back to the world map, or the last town we went to, when it's used. So we're going to use it, and as you can see, we have a 40-turn counter. This is to keep you from using it to cheese through a dungeon, run to the end, and then leap out before all the enemies catch up to you. And we're just going to wait for that to finish by hitting the R button. That's the auto wait. And we'll get a little pop-up here because of our Transmog chest. I'm going to take those boots because I'm not wearing any. And we're going to sell the other items. And that is going to spit us out right outside of our hometown. And now we're at the world map. And I will cover what this world map is all about, maybe with another video. Thank you for watching, and have a great day.